The word that I keep coming back to is uplifting. I have this conviction based on my lived experience that uplifting people or the planet doesn't have to be draining. It can actually feel uplifting to the person who's making that impact.
So welcome to another episode of Uplifting Conversations, Impact Engagement Podcast. I am thrilled to be here with Pierre Le Veaux from Seat at the Table today. Welcome, Pierre.
Thank you for having me. I've heard great things. Looking forward to really just telling my story and, engaging the audience.
Yeah, no, I would love to hear your story and I'm big on hearing kind of what's underneath the journey, what the motivation is to start a company, start a venture. It is not easy. It's heavy sledding. But before we get to that, though, I would love for you to share with folks exactly what Seat at the Table is and what you guys are up to right now.
Sure. So Seat at the Table was established 2 years ago. We'll get into the gist in terms of like the why, but I'll give a breakdown. It's what's formerly known as an equity crowdfunding portal, which means that companies, small businesses can raise capital from their community, their customers, their college friends, their high school friends, and so forth, at a smaller dollar amount. So historically, in order to invest in a business, which means like traditional venture capital, you had to be an accredited investor, so make $200,000, have a balance sheet of $1 million, and you would typically cut a check of $25,000 to $50,000, right? President Obama signed the Jobs Act, which allows small businesses to raise capital from what's considered non-accredited investors, so people that make less than $200,000, everyday Americans. And so with that, individuals, my aunts, my cousins, and so forth, can invest in their favorite businesses at smaller dollar amounts, say $300, $500, $1,000 per investment. And they are literally either equity owners and or debt holders. So we call it community crowdfunding because it can be equity or debt, but you are an investor in the businesses that you consume or serving the products that you consume and the businesses that you support. So we're one of 60 portals. It's called a portal. And we're governed by the SEC and FINRA, the same way that most investment banks are. And so our mandate is really to focus on marginalized entrepreneurs. So you think about people of color, LGBTQ community, right? And so people that are historically in positions where they're not quickly able to receive capital or substantial amounts of capital. And we understand that their journey to entrepreneurship is a bit more nuanced than majority members. So we're open to everybody, but we recognize that there's a community that does not have access to capital, and we'll love to talk more about that later. And on the flip side, we recognize that there's a community of investors that typically didn't have access to amazing deals, right? Or just, and I don't want to overstate amazing because I want to, make sure the community knows that you want to do your diligence and do it and be mindful of risk. You can definitely lose your money, and it's definitely likely to happen. But, the opportunity to participate in deals that they were historically excluded from. So I'll stop there. Let me know if you have any.
No, I have so many questions personally, and so much of that resonates. Part of what we aspire to be at Uplifting Capital is a force for democratizing investments in underrepresented funds, founders, impactful ventures. But we are at the accredited investor level. Actually, we're at the qualified purchaser level right now. So when we think about, these pensions and endowments that are investing in all of these kind of climate venture funds or social venture funds, are investing more inclusively, like they've been doing that for decades now, in what we call impact investing. And so we think about bringing it down market, even to kind of your private wealth firm or wealth advisory firm. But part of what has needled at me is the fact that a lot of the people who are of my community, in my community of origin, people around me, people I know, who come to us and say, like, I love what you're doing, I would love to get invested. I have to look them in the face and say, like, you don't have millions of dollars, or you don't make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So this opportunity is actually not available to you. As much as I want to help you build wealth, as much as I want to see your dollars flow into some of this impactful stuff that we're doing. And so I think the gap that you feel is incredible. And I also know it's hard, because one of the things that we looked at is, so what would we need to do in order to widen this to a broader set of people, non-accredited investors? And it is a hard lift. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, two things. One is that entrepreneurship is hard, is lonely. we can go round for round on that one. But just in terms of community or equity crowdfunding, navigating the legal process is very expensive in terms of time and money, right? So like, as I mentioned, we are governed by the SEC and FINRA. Their mandate is to protect the community, right? And they do a great job of that and making sure that the community is mindful of risk, right? In that portals or finance shops are acting accordingly, right? And so, we were fortunate to have some really what we call like family members, community members or investors provide us with capital early on to offset the legal and upstart costs. So the upstart cost is legal. It's a lot of technology infrastructure that has to be in line with legal as well. There's headcount, and a lot of my job in this seat and my team's job is really about education and quote unquote marketing, right? Making sure that the community knows that we are around, right? And that we are in the business of providing a platform that is dedicated to them. So that may mean going to conferences. It may mean, attending events. It may mean, making sure that I get to know you personally, right? So that, when you do have a call, when you take a call, you can say, hey, I know Pierre Le Veaux, I see you at the table. We don't have the luxury of majority members, right? And our portals that are backed by big capital, where we can run tons of Google ads, $1 million a year, 5 million or so. A lot of our marketing and our education is literally hand to hand, us holding class sessions of some sort, right? And really telling the community like, hey, this is an opportunity. We're looking for interesting entrepreneurs, but we're also here to help you as investors think about investment opportunities that are available to you. And there's some other ancillary kind of benefits in terms of connecting other resources that we do as well, which is another differentiator. But to wrap up your question, yeah, it's almost impossible. There is a financial hurdle. I think, the SEC had a report about 7 years ago, and it said it basically cost about $1 million to start a portal, right? And then we need to kind of think about the marketing, the tech infrastructure, the headcount, just like the legal back and forth, and really just the cost of working with service providers. Because the reality is, it's such a new industry. The Jobs Act was only signed so recently ago, right? Versus capital markets, stocks and bonds and so forth. A lot of the learning is on the go. And when learning is on the go, it becomes very expensive, right? And so one thing I would love to talk about, like a concept that I learned very early in life, and it really has played itself out in as an entrepreneur, one of the team members at Seed, is that it's very expensive being cheap. Right. And so meaning that if you try to cut costs and reality is, we're a lean shop. We don't have tons of resources. So we always think about cutting costs. Right. But for marginalized communities that are operating very leanly, in a very lean capacity, and that are forced to be extra thoughtful about how, where the dollar goes, because they understand that there's not as many dollars coming in, and they recognize that there isn't a safety net, which is typical for majority members, right? So there isn't a bailout of any sorts. But yeah, man, it's almost impossible. We're doing it. I'm always amazed. Every day I wake up and somebody, may call or text me or email me and say, hey, man, what you're doing is really, even though I call like this, what you're doing is really amazing, because we are literally entrenched in the minutia, right? It's just every day, we don't really get this, see the value, but we've had, some tremendous wins, and not from purely from a financial perspective. I wasn't even talking about that from that perspective. I'm saying just in terms of helping entrepreneurs who were unable to get capital find a way to get capital. And so we're very proud about that.
Yeah, no. So with the weight of that lift, the question that comes to my mind is why, right? So this is obviously not, it's not necessarily the most lucrative thing you could do from if you were purely financially motivated, this is not what you would do. And I know, background with very impressive academic credentials, first generation, everything, you've done investment banking at Goldman, VC, PE, all of that. You could have jumped off to something that was purely financially motivated, that didn't necessarily have all the trials and tribulations rolled up into it that this current venture hasn't. Why? So why do this? What was getting at? What was gnawing at you?
I was about to curse. I ask myself why every day. It's exhausting, bro. It really is, man. But I've always been somebody that if you kind of say my name in the professional streets and the streets in general, they'll always say that Pierre was somebody that was helpful. Right? I've always been, if you watch Hoop, I don't know if you saw the game yesterday, I'm always a pass first kind of guy. Right. And so even when I was a banker at Goldman, in that instance, and you operate in the same capacity where somebody wants to do a deal with you or invest or work with you in your firm, you're like, oh, like right now, unfortunately, you're not big enough. It's not your rules. You're not big enough. But then the next pivot is like, hey, by the way, I know somebody else, right? And it kind of keeps top of mind. And that just comes so naturally to me. Like that's just genuinely, I'm thinking about plugging folks. So I've always been oriented in that capacity. And so when I worked in New York as a banker for 11 years, I realized that there was just a gap in terms of not only access to capital, but really access to information, right? And so here I am immersed in this world of like significant wealth, right? People that have, generational impressive backgrounds in terms of education and Wall Street success, right? And so I'm in those rooms still realizing that my mom and dad live in Compton. So there was that bifurcation, right? But I also realized that many of my community members were not in that room, right? And so I was like, well, what can I do, right, in a more meaningful way to make sure that I can be helpful? So when I would have small businesses that would say, hey, you work at Goldman, I'm doing X amount of revenue, take us public. And I would say, I would chuckle just like you did. You probably need a couple more zeros behind you, but let me introduce you to a middle market banker or somebody else that can be helpful. So when I found out about community crowdfunding and the Jobs Act, I was randomly at a Starbucks in Compton, funny enough. And I found out about it and I just did a quick YouTube search and I saw there were a couple, there were basically 5 main portals, our biggest competitors. And I saw those, I looked them up and I quickly realized that there were no portals that were focused on my community. And so our marginalized communities. And I really want to talk about at some point, it is a very unique process for marginalized communities. So to go back to the why before we hop to that is that I realized that there was an opportunity to be of service, right? To help smaller businesses access capital, to help my network, my true friends, be able to access investment opportunities as well, and to really share information, because a lot of it is sharing information. So you may pass up on a deal, right? But the reality is now you get to know about this really cool product, right? That's founded by a person of color that, maybe you want to purchase at some point, right? You may not invest in it, and so I'm getting that. And on the flip side is I'm helping that entrepreneur get more exposure as well. So, I've always been one to think about facilitating economic activity, facilitating economic health or financial health. And this was just one way to go about it. But to go back to your question, man, I ask myself that every day because it is so exhausting. I was on a podcast one day with a good friend named Chris, ex-Georgetown law professor, works very closely with FINRA, very, very focused on financial literacy and fintech. And he brought this to my attention. I didn't realize. He said, hey, you have not 2 strikes against you, but it was I forgot how he phrased it, but it was two variables. One is that you are a Black owned company, right? Majority, diverse minority owned company that is solely focused on helping minority companies, right? And so it's double taxing, right? When you think about it. So I have my own challenges and frustrations, but the seat that I'm in, I'm required to empathize and be of service to other businesses that are struggling even more, right? And so I should have mentioned this at the beginning. The concept or the name Seed at the Table is a play on marginalized communities not having a seat at the table. So not being in those Wall Street boardrooms, right? Yep. And a seat at the table as it pertains to financial opportunities, as it pertains to information, right? As it pertains to just, being resource rich, right? And so it's very important because I understand how, so go back to the why, I understand how blessed I am by having, and I've done a lot of work to get into these rooms, but how blessed I am to be in these rooms. So now I'm I got to let everybody else in, right? And the best way to let everybody else in is to create our own table and allow people to exchange information and so forth.
Every aspect of that resonates. It's so funny. I talk about aspiring to show up generously. In all interactions, it's my aspiration to show up generously. Right? I don't know how that manifests itself, and I don't know whether that's an opportunity that comes directly from me. But it's interesting to me that ethos leads to founding something, because you see a gap, right? You see a place where you can show up generously in a larger way, and there's this larger context where you can be of service, or where you can show up generously. It's I uniquely have this information. For me, it was being inside this private wealth firm or building this private wealth firm. Wow, high net worth people, ultra high net worth individuals move their money like this. I see all these funds over here, all these fund managers who are doing incredible things, have incredible opportunities. They have no idea how to speak this language. And these individuals want this over here and have no idea how both lucrative and impactful their money could be over here. They're asking me what to do after George Floyd's murder, and they're investing in these off-the-shelf ESG funds. And so having access to that information and seeing that gap and wanting to show up generously as a filler of that gap is actually what led me to start this. So when you talk about having information, being in rooms of limited access, and then also being like, I think even being in our community is a place of limited access for some of the folks in the rooms that you were in the Goldman rooms, right? Or in the Wall Street rooms. And so having these 2 feet in the door for me at some point in my life was a point of stress, right? Like it pulls you in 2 different directions. People talk about code switching and the duplicity, all this stuff. But I think as you move up or as you become more aware of what your superpowers are, it actually becomes something that you can give to both of those rooms, right?
Yeah, I think, man, I'm really big on mental health. We'll talk about it at some point. But, I was there for 11 years, right? And so like literally immersed in the world that I did not grow up in to any capacity, right? Like literally public school in my life, never went to boarding school. I thought boarding school is where you like when you got in trouble, that's where you went to. Like literally when I was a kid, I was 30, but now I get it, right? But and so for me, it's like I think you come to also as adults, right? We come to a point where like, and this is like regardless if you're a marginalized community or not, it's like what's really fulfilling you, right? And so like I was doing extremely well, financially, although New York is very expensive. When I was a banker in New York, but I wasn't really that happy, man. And so like the reality is like in this seat, I can still work in finance, right? But I still have a social impact, community impact element to it. And that's like, that really feeds the why though, right? I kind of chuckle. I was giving myself a hard time. I'm like, I'm really about the business of helping people, right? And so this is just one lane, which I think is a significant lane in terms of helping people, right? And it's like I said, access to information and access just to opportunity.
Yeah. And like it's funny. It's like a selfish generosity, right? Because as much as one might talk about how hard it is, or as much as we can talk about doing it for being in service of others, it is personally fulfilling. It's not only kind of you're looking at the mission and you're out here patting yourself on the back for doing for others. I couldn't have it any other way, right? Like I got to a point where I couldn't have it any other way. So you said a little bit about being big on mental health. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. Like I'm big on all health. So as we were just talking, trying to tee this up, I was trying to make sure I was able to run and work out. So I think that's like where I do my best thinking, right? It's like my time to myself. And I think it's very important that people have time for themselves. I often find myself, overtapped, which I'm sure you are, because I'm on the leadership team with Seed. I still maintain a 9-to-5. I'm a very active dad, right? I'm very active in my community in terms of my friend circle. And so, when you kind of think about the past first mentality, there's tons of asks that are occurring, right? And so you have to block out time where either you're giving to yourself or you're allowing other people to give to you. But yeah, man, when I was in New York, I just operate this way in general. Like I'm running on all cylinders, right? So like very like wired, very competitive. And it was just exhausting, right? And so, it was there was a point when I was out there, I had to really get my own mental health in check, right? Because like that duality, right? Those bifurcated worlds, that gap was too big, and it was just exhausting keeping up, right? And keeping up with the facts and keeping up with the world that is not normal to you. It's literally, the equivalent of, being in I don't know, China or Hong Kong and not speaking Mandarin, but you're still operating same capacity. You're still, required to perform, and you're learning.
It's an extra job. It's a job on top of the job.
Just to show up. It is a job, right? And so, I was fortunate, man, to find some really great resources when I was in New York and really kind of just discover, a bit more about myself and just in terms of, how my own upbringing and or trauma has impacted how I navigate the world and my desires of the world, right? And so, I encourage, my friends and family members, and there's a gap in that respect too, to embrace, therapy, mental health. It's not something that you do when you're sick. It's something. It's just like LeBron has, not only does he have a therapist, but he has a physical trainer, right? Yeah. The mind is a muscle in itself. You want to continue to strengthen it. And get stronger, be able to, have a sense of pause, right? And not quickly react on many things. And so, that kind of that process has been very helpful to me. And just like I said, allows me to to carve out time for myself. So a couple of things. One is that it's trying to, encourage folks to be more open, as it with ideally with a professional, right? A trained professional. But the reality is too, just to be open with your friends, man. A lot of times, many of us are struggling in darkness, right? And, as a marginalized community, and especially the 9 to 5 capacity, what we do is we don't really brag about our success, right? What we do is we work really hard with our heads down, and we'll say that somebody will take notice. And so the challenge is when you're working really hard with your head down, there are a lot of bumps and bruises that happen as well. And, you need to be in a position to vent. And in some instances, you may not have a community, whether it be at the workplace or in your own house, where people can understand those bumps and bruises, right? So you can surround yourself with people that you can communicate with and really just take that burden off your chest. I think that's very important. One example that I always love to give, because, I think most people are competitive in varying ways, right? And it's so, especially in today's social media world, it's so easy to get caught up with what other people are doing and comparing yourself to it. So when I lived in New York, I lived and worked on the West Side Highway, so like right where the Freedom Tower is. It's a long strip, 9 miles on the west side of New York, top to bottom. And so I used to always run it. I used to always see tons of other runners any time of night, very New York, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever the case may be. One of my favorite authors is Malcolm Gladwell. I'd always see him running out there too. But nonetheless, I would run, and maybe I'm like, example was maybe I'm like 3 miles in a 5-mile run, right? And I'm running, and literally somebody of any shape or size that zooms past me, right? And like zoom past me, they make a right? And so here I am 3 miles in, my pace is okay. And I'm questioning myself, like, well, should I be running faster? Like, what's going on? How did this person who's smaller than me, whatever the case may be, heavier than me, running so fast, right? And so, it's easy to get caught up on other people's pace, but what you have to quickly realize is context, right? And so what's important on that example is that you don't know if that was their last mile and they were sprinting the last 100 yards, and as soon as they hit that corner, they started walking, right? Or you don't know if it's literally their first 100 yards, right? And like they're like on a 2-mile run, right? And so what's important is for you to run your own race, right? To execute your plan. And so as it pertains to mental health, it's like not getting caught up with others and being in a position where you can talk to others as well, right? And just to make sure that you are taking care of yourself.
I have a daily affirmation that I read to myself. And the last line in that is that I run my own race at my own pace toward my own infinite destination.
I like that.
Yeah, man. That's I love that example because I have never visualized that. I've just kind of said it. Yeah. So what's next? What's next for you? What's next for Seat at the Table?
Yeah, man, we continue to try to grow and find interesting, not only interesting, but entrepreneurs that I don't want to emphasize the interesting piece. You don't have to be like this cool product or company, but entrepreneurs that need access to capital and that are willing and or have the skill set to monetize their network and their support group. Because that's what it is, right? It's like you're raising capital from people that, will consume and or are consuming your products. I think one thing we didn't get to, and this is, it kind of feeds into like, what's the next? So for marginalized communities, there are 4 paths to capital. One is that as an entrepreneur, you self-fund, so you exhaust your balance sheet, your 401k, your credit cards, whatever the case may be. 2 is that if you are fortunate to have a robust friends and family network, that rich uncle that can cut you $100,000, $50,000, or whatever the case may be, or aunt, that's great. Marginalized communities, we don't really have that in spades. And if you even go back to the first point, our balance sheet is significantly less than the majority members as well, right? 3rd is that you go to a bank. You say, hey, Bank of America or any other bank, I have this really interesting business or this really interesting business idea. I want a loan for X amount of dollars. The bank is going to say, that's great. You could be revenue generating or not profitable or not, but you don't have any collateral. You don't have any assets that would back the loan. So they're less than likely to give you a loan. So there's significant data that shows that we are less likely to get a loan. We're less likely to receive higher interest rates, and our loan amounts are even less, right? And then 4th is venture capital. And what ends up happening is then it's like, well, you have this, this product, and you're like, well, I reached out to all these VC firms. And mind you, the VC community is my client on a 9-to-5 basis. And they're like, oh, we're not a fit. What people have to realize is that venture capital firms and private equity firms are looking for exponential returns. Really, venture capital firms are looking for exponential returns, right? They're looking for a 1 in 100 idea. right? And so as incredible as you think your business is, it's not going to be a fit for them because they're looking to maximize returns for their investors. And I left off grants. Grants are another opportunity as well. And this, like, that list is not exhaustive, but it's kind of like the traditional framework, right? And so, what we're doing at Seed is that we're saying, like, hey, now you have the opportunity to monetize your follower base, your friend base, your consumer base, and allow them to invest in your product, in your business, at the same time as consuming your product, right? And so to go back to your question for Seed is like, we're growing, we're trying to educate people that we are an option for entrepreneurs in terms of access to capital. You don't have to shoot for venture capital because that often leads to frustration, right?
It's a sliver. That's a very small sliver of businesses that are venture capital.
And banking is going to be a frustration as well, right? And so, for those that are considering raising capital or have businesses, I always say start yesterday. Start aggregating a list of people that you would say, hey, historically, that you would, that you would reach out to and say, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a round, a friends and family round, because this is a broader definition of friends and family, where you can invest $500 to $1,000. If I were to do this, would you be willing to do it? And then,
our community has a broader definition of friends and family anyway.
Everybody's a cousin. Everybody's a cousin. Yeah, everybody. That's my bro. That's my sis. So, to answer your question, what's next? We're anxious, man. We continue to try to find the right entrepreneurs that understand this and are willing to put themselves out there and be, active in terms of aggregating and creating a community. Because the other challenge is that most entrepreneurs think that we can just hang our shingle and people are going to run with the money towards us. Yeah. And it's actually the reverse, man. For like every person that is in a position to cut a check, there are literally 100 to 1,000 people that are asking that person for a check, right? And so try to find entrepreneurs early in the process to let them know that we are a resource. And then, we're also trying to do a better job of just educating the broader public in terms of telling them that, hey, we have some interesting, or not interesting, I don't want to stop saying it. We have some companies that may be interesting to them that they should invest in. And it is an opportunity. It's possible, right? As a community, we historically think real estate, and I think real estate is a solid asset class too. But this is an asset class within itself. So education on both the investor and the entrepreneur's perspective, and just making sure that, we continue to take care of our community.
I love it. So last and final question I'll ask is what does it being an uplifter mean to you?
Yeah, man, I think it goes back, and this is like thematic in this conversation from both of our perspectives, is keeping others top of mind, right? Mm-hmm. And so we, me and my friends, we throw around this concept called altruism, unselfish concern for the welfare of others, right? And so like with that, it's like literally just, being in a position where, how can I be helpful to somebody, and not just being so narrow and focused that I'm only trying to position myself and make an ass for myself, right? And so, I encourage folks to be mindful and to think broader than themselves, right? And so being an uplifter is just doing that. It's literally being mindful. Folks, still protect your health, man. Like, don't stress yourself out. Don't fall into the trap that I fell into. But there are little things you can do that will be beneficial to others and show appreciation, and others will tremendously appreciate. So I would say, the altruism piece, locked in, tied into my community and being a help and a resource to them is equally important as well. And then, once again, just kind of being emphasizing, wellness of all sorts, being mental and physical and, any financial health as well.
Incredible, man. I appreciate you sharing some wisdom, sharing your time. I love that you're out there and creating this opportunity. How can I shine a light on what you're doing, and how can folks find you?
Yeah, we're on all social media outlets. IG is at Seed, SEED, at the table. The website is Seed, SEED, at thetable.com. Feel free to sign up for our newsletter, subscribe. We continue to pump out information. We are actually doing a small friends and family round now. You can find us listed. You can't launch through your own portal, so we're actually launching through WeFunder. So it should be wefunder.com/seed at the table. And you can find out more information about the company there. There's some information on us in terms of a deck and just kind of like our success, the wins that we've had, how we've helped some companies in meaningful ways, both in dollar and just in terms of just being resourceful. And continue to tap, man. You can find me on LinkedIn. We're here for you. We're always looking for new ideas. We're always looking for new businesses. And we really just want to hear back from the community.
Fantastic. Appreciate you, man.
Perfect. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you guys. Take care. Bye.
Please be sure to subscribe, like, and click the notification button so you never miss an episode.